One last time.
Okay. You looked up again that time, though.
Okay. Oh, okay. I can feel it. Okay.
Sam Raimi must have been just so obsessively devoted to getting every detail of the film right that we enjoy it because it's familiar.
Yeah, it's getting real slow. Okay, lay her down. Ready? And do it.
Evil Dead is such a pure horror film that's clearly made with such love for horror, and there are not a lot of movies made like that today.
Keep fogging. And when I yell for it, then stop it. Fog it. Stop.
Most horror films are about people being picked off, but, you know, Evil Dead is essentially about one actor being picked on, you know, and it's kind of like Sam, you know, antagonizing his best friend from school.
This is insanity.
There were numerous reasons I think that Evil Dead worked, but first and foremost it was Sam. And then it was ignorance on our part, because we just kept making that movie. And if something didn't work, we went back and redid it again and again and again.
Scene 101, take 2, sound
1,000. Rolling.
Scene 19, sound 8. She's dead!
Scene 68, FD, take 3, sound
Scene
1086.
68, FD, take 4, sound 1087.
Take 3, sound 366.
One by one, we will take you. All of you!
Sam and I met each other in college. His older brother, Ivan, was my housemate.
Turned out Sam and his brother Ivan had found out this great little scam. If you're a student living on campus, you had an enormous discount on renting an auditorium. This would help promote student-led activities. So they'd rent a small auditorium with a theater screen, bring in a Super 8 projector, and show his old high school and junior high movies. I remember titles like 6 Months to Live, Attack of the Helping Hand. Oh, just all these little screwy things.
Ran them on college, made money, and kind of decided, hey, let's drop out of school and go make a feature film. There's these drive-ins, and we can make a movie that better than the crap we're seeing in the drive-ins. That was really, at that time, like 25% of the movies in America ran in drive-ins.
Well, we have kind of a golden age in the 70s when you could put almost anything on the drive-in screen. You had a period where the ratings board was not watching. So the 70s was actually a great time for all kinds of horror. There was an illicit nature to these films that were released on the independent circuit, you know, where you didn't really know where they came from. You know, the greatest films of the 70s and early 80s are films where you watch them and there's something unsettling about them to where you feel like, was the person who made this entirely sane?
Scene 22, take 6, sound 146. And action.
The Raimis lived in Detroit right around the block from me. And so, you know, I became fast friends with Ivan and, you know, vis-a-vis knew Sam literally from about 2 years old. And he was quite a kid, I'll tell you that. And, I mean, one of the things that Ivan and I used to do, and this may explain some of it now, is that when he was young and in his crib, we used to push him around the crib. We'd hurt him in the corners with knitting needles.
His older brother, Ivan, who's a doctor, who's co-writing Spider-Man right now, but Ivan co-wrote Darkman and co-wrote a bunch of things, Army of Darkness. He was my best friend throughout my youth. And Sam was his obnoxious little brother with his Spider-Man comics. And so for years there, it was strictly, take your stupid comics and get the hell out of here. And that's what Sam meant to me. I was Sam's cameraman on many of his Super 8s, and I'm in almost all of some bit part. And Sam is the bad guy in almost every one of my Super 8s. I always cast him as the villain, and because he'd chew up all the scenery.
Sam had really only done dramas and comedies, so he made a little short horror movie that we all made together called Clockwork, and then another one that we used to raise money, like a 30-minute long Super 8 movie called Within the Woods. Sam, back when we were making Evil Dead, was exactly like Sam is today. He's creative, smart, incredibly hardworking. 98% of the time, very kind. 2% of the time, stern when he feels like people aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, not because it affects him, but it doesn't honor the rest of the people on the cast and crew who are working.
People don't see the funny side of Sam so much anymore because he's gotten so serious with the movie business. But he's actually one of the funniest people I know, aside from Bruce Campbell. And the two of them together just kept me in stitches all the time. It was like living in the middle of a constant Three Stooges comedy routine.
He really did nothing else except dream, think, eat, sleep about the movie. And, you know, his energy kind of drove all of us.
Scene 22A, take 1, sound 485.
Ellen had been a friend of Sam and Bruce's in high school and been in some of their high school movies, and then she was in the little short we made, Within the Woods, that we used to raise money.
In Within the Woods, the parts were reversed, and Bruce got to be my victim. I got to beat up on Bruce, which was really fun.
The first time I met Sam, he was sitting at a restaurant table with Bruce and Rob, and I had arrived a little late, and I walked into this restaurant, and I saw 3 young guys. They couldn't have been more than 19, 20, 21 at the most, and they were sitting there they were laughing with each other, they were blowing straw papers at each other, and they were doing that spoon routine where you layer the spoons and then you pop it up. And I said, it just can't be them. These just must not be the guys I'm meeting. But they were the only ones in the restaurant, so.
She was a real sweet sorority girl cheerleader, which I always hated, but I loved Betsy. But I was kind of hippie, rebel, pseudo-intellectual, Jewish girl type, and I always, I didn't like those sorority girls. So when we filmed The Evil Dead, I actually had a lot of respect for her because she was probably the most experienced in terms of acting in the real world at that time. Teresa Tilley. Teresa has many names. She's actually Teresa Seaforth. That's her real name. And then she didn't like that, so she changed it to Teresa Tilley. And in the movie, she was Sarah York.
I got my first SAG commercial right before I got cast in Evil Dead, which is a story that is often asked of me. I had really struggled to get in the union, and literally the ink had just dried on my membership card. So, I'm down there making the movie going, you know what, no one's ever gonna see this thing. I'll just put a different name on it and it'll be fine. I was suspended from the union for 6 months.
All the women shared a bedroom, and Teresa often could be found sitting on the floor meditating and, taking her 3-hour showers, using up all the hot water. And she was the most sensitive one of the cast. And we all really got along fine.
All right. Yeah.
Rich actually had a little bit of Scotty in him, that kind of party down guy.
We'd be stuck in some uncomfortable situation for a long period of time, and he'd always find the lighter side.
I had heard he was an award-winning diver. So I thought, well, that's really interesting. He's a swimmer and a diver, and he's going to be in this horror film. This is really, really unique.
In general, just a really nice, regular guy. And he was the only one, really, of any of us who had always loved horror movies and always wanted to be in one and was so thrilled to be there, to be in a horror movie, and is, to this day, so thrilled that he got to be in a horror movie.
2, sound 1,150.
Bruce played so many different roles in that movie. I mean, he was producer, he was sometimes kind of, co-director, he was the star, he was the manure shoveler in the cabin when we first got there. I mean, Bruce just did everything.
Scene 47, take 1, sound 429.
All right.
Get the hell out of there, Campbell.
Get out!
Bruce was a chump. He sprained his ankle one night, and Sam and I then poked it with sticks for about a week just to drive him crazy. It was the single meanest thing he and I've ever done, and very immature, but at the time it was hysterical.
Sam's goal always is to see how far he can push Bruce, and Bruce will never back down.
I think what makes Bruce so great as a horror hero is that he's handsome, but he's not too handsome. He's not like, you don't think of him as the football jock character in a film, which is usually the guy you want to die in a horror film. You think of him more as the goofy guy in science class.
You know, let's just get it all on the table right here. I always had a huge crush on Bruce Campbell, as do, you know, many women. But I think a few men, too.
Very handsome, very funny, very charming. And when I looked at the script and they asked me to play opposite Bruce, I felt that I was the lucky one.
Bruce was also very shy and also kind of hid behind his shtick, but Bruce just has to walk across the floor and I laugh.
He liked to do those pratfalls you see in the movie or those stunts. He loved doing that. I mean, he could do them over and over again.
You know, on the set of Evil Dead, he was always a real gentleman. Unlike some other people, he was always very concerned for our welfare.
The fact that you had a male protagonist in a horror film is itself strange. Usually that's a recipe for disaster. People who had tried before to use a male protagonist in a horror film had failed. The formula says you should have a strong female as the lead, but Ash, in the form of Bruce Campbell, was the perfect person for this story. Partly that's because he conveyed the great philosophical dilemmas of the film. Mainly, if your girlfriend goes zombie on you, what do you do?
Roll it. Scene 56G, take 1, sound 575.
Off we went to Tennessee in 1979.
We all drove down from the Detroit area in 1 or 2 cars, 1 or 2 vans, and we arrived in this small town of Morristown. Ellen and Teresa and I walked into this cabin, which of course had no locks, no bathroom, no heat, no electricity, but it did have the remains of cow manure everywhere on the floor, because either cows or goats or whatever animals are down there had walked through it for years and had made it their second home, and now it was going to be our home.
We rebuilt it from the inside out. I mean, we knocked down the walls, we fixed the structure, we added where they shoot out the window with the gunshot, that wasn't a window, we built that. We built the hatch in the floor. I think we remasoned the fireplace. It was a piece of junk. We made it a little better, and then, by the end we had totally, destroyed it. It really is scary. I mean, like, when you would go walk down at night, it was pretty frightening. It was really eerie. And then the other thing is, and I'm sure you've heard this before, people have heard this before, I mean, hunters would just come walking through with like a dozen dogs, because we were in the woods.
It was a Bible Belt, and of course the locals did bring a little moonshine around every now and then, but mainly there was nothing to do, and it was just our little band of filmmakers.
Nobody can conceive of actually how this movie got made, because we all lived in one house, like 20 of us, on cots, with a guy who couldn't cook, cooking meals for us.
Since I really had no skill, like I couldn't light and I wasn't really a sound man, I ended up being both the transportation coordinator and the cook.
There really wasn't anyone hired to do the lighting. There was some idea that Sam was going to do it himself, which is somewhat ridiculous since he had enough on his hands directing the picture. So lighting was being done in a fairly haphazard fashion until finally I said, if you let me do the lighting, everything is going to go a lot faster and the film will actually look better.
I was able to bring several different departments in one guy here. I created the Book of the Dead and the Kandarian dagger and some other little props and things. And then I was responsible for the design and creation and application of the makeup.
It was a very small crew. I mean, basically it was like a 7 or 8 man crew.
Sam directed. Bruce kind of looked after the checkbook some and acted. And I filled in for every other thing.
The film was not tremendously technically proficient because they had no money. I mean, it was really shot on such a low budget. But what I admired and love about the film is they didn't care that they had no budget. They still went for it.
And I mean, I don't know if I'm telling it 25 years later, but I mean, the thing was budgeted 150 and came in at 500. That's a little bit of an overage. I mean, now, admittedly, 500's nothing in the world of movie making, and the film absolutely needed it. But who could have known?
But at the same time, there were a lot of things about it that were very professional. I mean, they handled us in a very professional way and had contracts and scripts, and not that they really stuck to the script.
I mean, the script was on 27 napkins.
I can't do that forever.
No one got away unscathed.
Frankly, I think Sam meant it to be that way so that it would come back into the movie. That if everybody was in extreme pain and misery, that somehow this would translate into horror, which he told us every single day.
This was a primitive time, and Tom Sullivan, who was really a great artist and had a really difficult job, he was doing all the molds for face mask and all those kind of things. And back in this ancient time, we just didn't know anything, so you'd slather the actor's face or arm or leg with Vaseline so you could pull the mold off, and then pour plaster of Paris on it.
I wound up using acrylic paint, which it even says in the tube, don't put it on your skin. But I used that to paint the masks as well as the actors' faces. And do you know how you get acrylic paint off an actor's face? You scratch it with like a scouring pad or something. And the horrible things I put those poor folks through.
If they would have had money to do proper special effects makeup, that movie would have been as scary as The Exorcist, in my mind. Because the one thing that always took me out of the movie, maybe because I had an upbringing and an interest in monster makeup, was that they just didn't have the money or the resources to do really, really elaborate character prosthetic stuff.
When I made Cabin Fever, I had all the actors watch Evil Dead, and Ryder Strong had seen the movie a number of times. And kind of any time someone would complain about anything, we'd say, well, look at Bruce Campbell. And what do you think they went through on Evil Dead? And it kind of shut everyone up.
Ow! Ah, the injuries, yes. Well, certainly running through the woods.
Ow! God damn it.
One night we were shooting her running through the woods and whatever, and we had this long piece of plywood dolly track, and there were all these splatters of blood on it.
I scraped the hell out of myself. They had laid tracks of 2x4s, and I guess I bled all over those.
And I said something unkind about actresses being cut, and that's when I know they were finally working hard, but I don't remember saying it.
Well, in 1981, you could do anything to a woman in a movie. You didn't have to abide by the political correctness rules of today.
They came to me one time and said, all right, we're going to be going outside, and here's what's going to happen, Betsy. It's going to be really cool. It's going to be really neat, really groovy. Ash is going to start to hit you over the head to try and get rid of you with these beams of wood. But they're really not beams of wood. In fact, we're having somebody go into town. There's a local Sears. We'll get these styrofoam beams. They won't hurt at all. They won't, and we'll just kind of hit you a couple of times. Well, what they came back with were beams that at that time you could put up in your den or your rumpus room, and they were made to look like real wooden beams.
She then had to, on cue, get hit in the face with one of these things. Of course, Sam decided that he was going to be the one right under the camera lens with these fake styrofoam 2x4s and hit Betsy right in the chin really hard.
I was really mad, which of course Sam wanted more of. Sam wanted, she's really, really mad. Keep the camera going. Let's do it again. Let's do it again.
And then after that was done, Sam, we were going home that night, and he said, you know what, I really realized that we probably should have beaten her naked. And I went, I don't think she would have done it, Sam.
Every time we'd do the scene again, we'd all, lay around her so that she would stay warm, because she couldn't really put on a coat or anything. She had to keep her costume on. It was full of Caro syrup. And so we supported each other and, just made the best of it.
I think I have some legitimate scars from stuff. I know Bruce does. I mean, you ask him, I mean, he's got a hole in the back of, a dent in the back of his leg.
Bruce had it really worse than anyone because he had to be the actor in front of the camera, so he had to maintain whatever actors have to do to get where they need to go to. And we said, you've got to put the contacts in the actress's eyes because you're the responsible one, Bruce. So he was given that chore, but there was no water, there was nothing in this cabin we were working in. There was only a coffee pot to put instant coffee in scalding hot water, so he'd put his hands in there, kind of wash them, and then put the eyes in and out.
Back then, they were hard, full scleral contact lenses. Now you can get soft, and it's easy, pop them in. But then you actually had to have a little plastic applicator, and you'd have to pull the actor's eye open, and the lens would be mounted on the end of the applicator, and you have to go and pop it into their eye. And then they're completely blind.
We couldn't see through them. They were about this big. They covered your whole eyeball, you know, unlike normal contacts that just cover your iris. So all those scenes where any of us are possessed with the white eyes, we are totally blind. It wasn't just that we were shooting in the cold and that we were shooting in a building with no electricity and plumbing and all that. It was the waiting time.
You gotta understand, we didn't have space heaters. I mean, there were no trailers. You know, there were no grip trucks.
I mean, normally when you shoot a movie, even if it's in difficult conditions, you then have somewhere nice to go to wait, or at least somewhere warm to go to wait, where you can wash your hands. And you know, so when we were done shooting something, we had the cold, unheated cabin to go sit in and wait. And, you know, it oftentimes, you know, besides being painful, cold, and sticky, it was boring.
And it was incredibly cold, and they had been working really hard, so I made this really intense chili. So I said, fellas, why don't you just come back to the house and eat? And I came up the next morning, and they were all crashed out at the table. And Sam had thought that I had drugged everybody and violated them. And so the only irony in all this is that they were stupid enough to eat it again the second night and lost another night of shooting.
There's this myth that, you know, the Evil Dead cured me of any desire to act. I immediately quit acting as a result of the Evil Dead. No, that's crap.
I know people say that we were mad and we left, but that really wasn't the case at all. I mean, all of us had things to do. We had all fulfilled our commitment and our contract, but then they just continued with other ideas afterwards.
Almost the entire cast and crew left. It was supposed to be a 6-week shoot that ran almost 12 weeks.
We shot like 3 weeks with just 6 of us, Bruce and 5 of us, Bruce, Sam, myself, Josh Becker, and David Goodman. Pretty much all the stuff with Bruce alone in the cabin and all that.
Then there was another week of shooting several months later in Gladwin, Michigan, at Bruce Campbell's family's cabin, and then there was another week of shooting at Rob Tappert's family's cabin in Marshall, Michigan. And there was several weeks that got set up at Sam's house, in the backyard, in his basement.
We would recruit local people to what we call be fake shims, put on this costume and shoot them over their back or do whatever we had to do.
We shot the movie so completely back-assward, and with the Bruce getting so much stuff, black stuff in his face and white stuff in his... And each night nobody was keeping continuity. So I just thought, and we'd just throw crap out on the floor going, I guess that's sort of like the way it was. I had no clue it would even cut together.
I thought, are people actually supposed to think this is real? That rubber hand that goes like this when you slam it in the door?
You have to remember, back 25 years ago, it wasn't the kind of movie that would catapult your career.
Well, the interesting thing about Evil Dead is that if you told somebody what it was about who had never seen the film, it would sound like a bunch of the biggest cliches in the world. There wasn't anything in the film that we hadn't seen before. You know, it's, you know, the kids go in the woods and the kids don't come out.
When we were shooting Evil Dead 2, Tom Savini came to visit, and I introduced him to Sam and Rob, and he later, Tom said, you know, I was walking down the street in New York, and these 2 guys grabbed me and pulled me into an editing room, and it was Sam and Rob, and they had recognized Tom on the street. So even back then, they were able to sort of get this intriguing buzz about the film.
The first time I saw Evil Dead with an audience was at the Redford Theater in Redford, Michigan, and it was a screening for all of our investors. And we knew that it would be fun, and we also knew that we should pack the audience, make sure that... So the Redford Theater was one of the great old theaters. It had a huge pipe organ, so we got a pipe organ guy to play, and it came up out of the ground, and all the investors and cast and crew were on the main floor, and then it was all like high school kids in the balcony. And somewhere in the middle of the, or towards the end of the movie, as the Ash was battling the monsters, kind of like this hockey chant came from the balcony. Caught her up, caught her up, caught her. And the kids stomping their feet.
Rows of people screaming, standing up, and these were like involuntary reactions. And they would talk back to us, don't go through the door. Oh no, Ash, no.
And then a couple of film festival screenings that we were at in Paris and Spain where it elicited the same reaction, but in another language.
I think I saw The Evil Dead at the very first public screening, which was at the Cannes Film Market in 1982. Now, I tell people I saw it at Cannes, and they think that that's, that I saw it at some fancy festival. I didn't go to the festival. I went to the Cannes Film Market, which was, especially at that time, which was where all the lowlifes of the world gathered in these little streets and alleys off of the main avenue there in Cannes, and they showed their movies strictly for commercial sales. It was finished for at least 18 months before it was actually released, and so all that time I was saying, bring on the Evil Dead, bring on the Evil Dead, bring on the Evil Dead. And finally it was shown to some exhibitors, and the exhibitors went, oh yeah, let me at that.
The movie actually it premiered October 15th, I think, of 1981, and really didn't get released domestically in America.
Because of the way it was rated, or not rated, that is, it just didn't get much publicity. It was pretty much people knew it was playing because it had a showtime at the theater. But very few reviews, and ads were difficult to get. Television ads even more difficult.
You needed to see it at a grindhouse on 42nd Street on a midnight show in New York. That was the real hardcore crowd. They went absolutely crazy for it.
It played for a long time in Texas, and I was beating the drum for it, and it was something fresh and new. And I think part of the reason it was so popular is it came out of nowhere. Nobody knew who Sam Raimi was.
Probably no one would have ever seen Evil Dead if it wasn't for video.
When I was at college, like, somebody had it on VHS, and it was such a kind of crappy sort of third-generation version, which just added to the kind of the scariness of it.
I remember being in a video store and asking if they had Evil Dead, and they said, copy got stolen. And I was just reading how it's the most stolen videotape in America.
My friend Jeff and I rented Evil Dead, and he actually watched it the night before, and he called me and he said, this is the scariest movie I've ever seen. And he said, it's too scary to watch at night, so we have to watch it during the day. And my friend Jeff came over to my house, and he brought the copy of Evil Dead, and we put it on, and it probably took us about 6 hours to get through the movie because we were so terrified we had to stop and go outside and, like, sit in the sun.
Leonard Maltin called it the most disgusting thing he'd ever seen, and, wow, thank you, Leonard.
And of course, it had that great, quote from Stephen King on it, which really, that quote literally propelled that movie because of the fact that Stephen King had said that it's one of the most ferociously original horror movies ever made.
He had this image of Evil Dead as being the sort of kind of a film born of hell. That it would, like, literally, like, come up from the depths of the woods. And, that it was almost like some kind of strange demonic snuff movie.
I mean, for me, nothing terrified me more than Possession. The Exorcist was the scariest movie I'd ever seen. But Evil Dead was like 90 minutes of the most horrifying moments of The Exorcist happening to younger people closer to my age.
My initial kind of, like, knowledge of the film was that it was, like, this bad, evil film, that it was a video nasty. Basically what happened is it was very much similar to here, but when videos first there was the first video boom, there wasn't a separate classification for video. And a lot of the distributors were pretty naughty in terms of, say something like Lucio Fulci's Zombie would be released at the cinema with 10 minutes cut out of gore. the same distributors would just put out the uncut version on video, thinking that nobody would ever check. And of course they did. So when they kind of found out that this was happening, they just had a massive clampdown. There were films like Evil Dead, which is like, yes, it's kind of gory, but it is like a work of art in its field. It's like, you know, this doesn't deserve to be kind of like, you know, this doesn't deserve to be seen in this way. Even though it is kind of intense and gory, it shouldn't be lumped in with like Faces of Death and I Spit on Your Grave, you know. I think even Sam like had to go to like Leeds Crown Court to kind of defend the film in court.
It's crazy to look at Evil Dead now and think that Sam Raimi was brought up on obscenity charges because of it, that this is a video nasty, and that the reason that Sam Raimi made Evil Dead 2 funny was because he was put on trial in England. It's like insane. I mean, we've come so far. But can you imagine that, going to jail for making Evil Dead? I mean, I guess it'd be worth it because Evil Dead's awesome. I'd go to jail for Evil Dead. I've gone to jail for other things. Sorry.
I remember we had just wrapped Day of the Dead, and I had a party at my house, and my girlfriend at the time was there, who was the script supervisor on Day of the Dead, and we had a bunch of us, and we were watching Evil Dead in the basement on video, and she was like so disgusted that she walked out.
It's always interesting to see people's reaction to Evil Dead. My wife, she saw Evil Dead long before I ever met her, probably when she was 17 or 18, and living in New Zealand, and she thought whoever made that movie was so sick they should be put away.
The first way that Sam Raimi comes straight in your face is he says, "There's only one way to kill the zombies, total dismemberment." Arms, legs, hands, head, everything. Well, there's many ways to kill the zombies in zombie movies of the past, but this is the first one where the rules seem to be total dismemberment.
I love the idea that you're trapped somewhere with your friends and your friend is sick and you want to help them, but you may have to kill them. And that's what terrified me about Evil Dead. You're trapped with your friends, but it's not your friend. It's something inside your friend, but you have to completely hack your friend to pieces to get rid of it.
It was not as much fun as you might think a dismemberment could be. It was getting all in your costume and syrup and the eyes and everything in you, and then being nailed into the floor. The only part of me that was above the floor was my head and one arm. And Bruce and Rob were on some other area of the floor, and their legs were dressed up as my legs. So they were under there, and that at least made me feel better. But nonetheless, it was dark and late at night and cold, and we were in the ground, and I was worried about snakes and rats biting my butt or something. But Sam and Tim, the director of photography, were at camera shooting this thing, and they were trying to get just the right light. I had been under there I don't know how long, and nobody was talking. And I said, "What's going on? What's going on?" And they had fallen asleep at the camera.
I loved the rape by the forest scene, even though I can't really tell you how the rape by the forest relates to the rest of the story, or why the zombies would somehow be related to a raping forest.
Let's get it all out in the open. I was 20 years old. Let's just start with that, okay? I was very gung-ho to make this film. I wanted to do what the director told me. I didn't really think anybody was ever going to see this movie. You know, big surprise now, but, and I did have concerns that I talked about with Sam. And he somehow convinced me there's going to be a lot of fog, you're not going to really see anything, you know, don't worry about it. So I'm going, okay, fine, fine. We did that scene, you know, exhaustion doesn't even describe. I was running in my nightgown, it was 40 or less degrees. I was running through woods, you know, just brambles, and there was no paths or anything. Just running and running nonstop, getting hurt, and I just kind of got to the point where, okay, fine, just do what you need to do so we can get this over with.
The one big twig is wrong on so many levels.
That final, really, I had no idea they were going to do that. I mean, obviously, I knew that the legs were going to spread open and that the vines were going to crawl up, but that final with the stick was all post-production. I had no idea until I saw it, and I went. And of course, at the premiere, you know, with my mother there, and that was fun.
I heard that when, like, Sam Raimi had to, you know, sort of was taken to court and had to appear in court to kind of answer the sort of the, you know, the kind of the claims against the film, that he actually afterwards felt kind of like, you know, that the tree rape was a mistake. And it's interesting in terms of, like, it's obviously that the one bit that's not repeated in the sequel or any of the other sequels. And it's definitely something that's really, you know, like the thing that still kind of is really, truly shocking out of the entire film.
It never gets any better for me, except for now I have just a much more of a sense of humor about it.
In a film where people get decapitated and raped by trees, and the thing that kind of that everybody kind of gets the biggest reaction is a pencil being stuck in somebody's ankle.
That pencil in the ankle hurt more than anything. You could feel that grinding into your bone. It was so disgustingly painful.
I'm getting queasy thinking about it.
Sam had told me during this, while we were reading the script, that my ankle would be stabbed. I said, well, it's not a problem. You know, I'm sure you'll work something out. So when it came down to shooting that night, which I think took just 1 or 2 nights, I know I had this, you know, trademark brown corduroy jeans on, and we would remove one leg, and so it would be just laying out there in the wind. We'd insert this artificial leg, and we, you know, stood at an angle for hours trying to get this pencil into this leg, which would then, you know, spurt blood and whatever else was coming out.
And you see the veins spread out. It's like they hand drew those veins and shot it frame by frame. That feels more real than watching veins crawl across someone's hand with CGI.
Back in the early 80s, there were a lot of 16mm horror movies like Basket Case that suddenly would have stop motion in them. And I'm a stop motion animation freak, so when they went to stop motion at the end and the melting, I just thought it was all part of the look of how the monster dissolves.
I managed to talk Sam into using stop motion for the finale, for the meltdown scene. Originally in the script, the characters were going to smoke and deflate, more or less. And Sam had an idea that I could just kind of find some way to make balloons to fill up the shapes, and then we'd just deflate them and have smoke come out. And my thinking was, well, if somebody blows raspberries during that, like, we've just screwed up the whole movie.
Sometimes you watch horror movies and the camera works crazy and you go, what the fuck is this? I can't follow what the hell's going on. This is a mess. But Raimi had such control of the camera work. He really, really used it to be from the point of view of these demons and spirits.
You're just watching it thinking, you know, not only have I not seen that in a big Hollywood studio film, you know, that shot, but, like, this is, like, you know, a 20-year-old doing this.
Well, the camera work's entirely Sam's. I mean, every single shot is something he had in mind.
You know, the camera starts always really, really, really far away from either the actors or the cabin, and then it would sort of move in and around things. So it wasn't just, you know, it sort of rushing straight at you. It grounded the POV because it definitely felt like it was part of the forest.
Every other person did the point of view kind of in that kind of way, and you'd seen it been ripped off in countless worse versions, and you've seen it being ripped off by bigger directors. I remember when I saw Bram Stoker's Dracula, I was thinking, he's fucking nicked that from Evil Dead. How could Coppola do that? How cheap.
Evil Dead is a very technically proficient film. I think that's one reason film students love it.
I don't know if Evil Dead's been influential on any one particular filmmaker.
Right after I watched the movie, I ran right up to my room and read my Fangoria issue, because I had it and read it and forgotten about it, and then reread the interview with Sam Raimi, and he talks about making this movie for $350,000. And the fact that he was 21 years old when he did it. And I remember being 13 at the time thinking, oh my God, I'm gonna be 21 soon. That's right out of college. Like, this is possible.
I made a film when I was 20, like straight out of art college, a really low-budget film. And the main thing in my head was I was kind of thinking, I've got to do my own Evil Dead.
To see a film like Evil Dead where everything, like weird POVs and everything was just, it was so demented and had so much style to it that you couldn't help but be affected by the movie in some fashion.
Somehow, seeing that Sam Raimi did it, for me, just made it possible that a guy like me that was really, really into horror movies could just go out in the woods, grab a camera, and make the bloodiest, most disgusting film they can.
Recently, there was a movie made called Cabin Fever, which is referential to it.
When I was writing Cabin Fever, the single biggest influence was Evil Dead. I said, I want to take a 16mm camera and go in the woods and make a total splatter film like Evil Dead.
The great thing about Evil Dead is it's gore combined with strong dramatic motivation. At the same time, it's one reason that we have so many bad gore movies today is that less talented filmmakers watch Evil Dead, think, oh, I'm going to do something like that, and they fail to come up with the inner dramatic motivations for the characters, and then we just have a bunch of blood on the screen.
Scene 101 NC, take 3, sound 1151.
Being involved in Evil Dead has been an amazing journey. I was in my early 20s when these three guys asked if I wanted to be in a horror film and get paid very little money and go to a small town in Tennessee, you know, on location, and then to endure everything we did on location, then for it not to have come out for 2 or 3 more years, then to go forward and see it every once in a while in what was then a new idea, which were video stores, and then to proceed to reunite with Ellen and Teresa, almost full circle. We're all now married, we have teenagers, we're obviously older. We can enjoy this part of Evil Dead and the fans and the cult classic that it's become a lot more.
Scene 56H, take 2, sound 578.
Who would have thunk this would and did and could have happened?
We were younger then. I mean, it's 25 years ago. I literally was the only one that had worked on a movie set before.
Scene 101J, take 1, sound 1036.
I personally felt that a lot of times we were just shooting in the dark, but I knew in my gut that we were doing something right. Lord, no, look what it's become.
Looking back 25 years ago, it's kind of like looking at your youth and being able to laugh at what was serious and emotional back then. And to think, of course, that people love this movie, and so many people love this movie, and how it's affected filmmakers, and that definitely makes you feel proud that you're part of something like that.
Scene 19A, take 1, sound 144.
Well, it was the first feature film I was involved in, and you know, I got to see how the whole process worked and how you could actually do this with a 16mm camera and your friends, and you can. And as Sam proved, much more so than many people, I mean, he made a classic film.
As you turn, can you go, ah?
Okay, my tooth out just came out.
It definitely was not a real pleasant experience to make the movie, although it was exhilarating because I was young and I was making a feature film. But then what I've been able to do since then is really develop a sense of humor about it and try to look into what it is that the fans see that they like. And I also am able now to look at the film and see how creative it is and see, you know, what a genius Sam was and is, and what he did with so little money. And, you know, so the whole experience really has become now something that is kind of this cool thing about me, this other part, this schizophrenic other part of my life that I can talk and laugh about. And I like to watch people's reactions when I tell them I was in The Evil Dead. That's fun.
Scene 71, take 4, sound Z76, wild sync.
Well, The Evil Dead never had a great story, great dialogue, it really relied on visceral quality of an imagination, of kind of taking the audience where they hadn't gone before, and kind of a wild, over-the-top ride.
There's that Orson Welles quote about kind of filmmaking when he said about, like, you know, making movies is like the ultimate kind of train set. And, you know, watching Evil Dead, it seems to me that not only is it literally like watching a teenager with his train set, but Sam Raimi is the kind of person who would turn the speed of the train up to, like, sort of its maximum and make it go round until it crashed.
And when you watch Evil Dead, you feel like this is someone whose love for horror is so pure and has such vision. The movie's like exploding and bursting with talent that there kind of hasn't been, probably since Blair Witch, a film that came along, or Scream, one of these seminal horror movies that came on and kind of rewrote the rules that everyone starts to copy.
Jesus! I think Evil Dead had the same qualities that other endearing horror films have. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Night of the Living Dead, Halloween. Is that they're all low budget, they're all raw, relentless. And the directors were so resourceful with what they had at their disposal, and were still able to make something that 20, 25 years later has the same impact that it had when it was first made.
Horror generations are short, 6 or 7 years. So we have about the third generation of horror fans discovering it, and most horror films don't last more than their own generation.
Sam's success with Spider-Man is no fluke. The guy's a brilliant filmmaker, and I would love to see what he could come back and do with his new sophistication on Evil Dead 4.
We set out to do something. We overcame huge hurdles and difficulties, made a movie, got it out there, got it distributed, and kind of went through the whole process, and to a minor degree succeeded. And that was kind of a testament for kids coming from not Hollywood, but outside the Hollywood circle, that you kind of can chase your dreams, and if you're unrelenting in following them, sometimes it works out.
Rolling.
Maybe at the 50th anniversary of Evil Dead, we'll finally know what it all means. It just means, don't go in the woods, and ash rules.
Sam fired me off it the last day. And he also fired me off every other film I worked for him on the last day. That's why I don't work for him anymore.
Sam made a brilliant decision to kind of remove anything that actually might date it. I mean, maybe the Hush Puppy shoes or something, but there's nothing that really sets it in the 70s.
Rape in the forest, or...
Rape in the forest? What is it? Do you guys know what he's talking about? Rape in the forest? Rape in the forest. Oh, the rape in the forest. Yeah, that wasn't me.
Oh, it was a real stroke of genius. I like the name Sarah. My sister had just named her daughter Sarah, and I always wanted to live in New York. So, there you go.
Ellen completely wigged out one night. She doesn't remember it at all. Yeah, just which we termed thereafter is called the latex point, where you've had too much latex on for too long, and all of a sudden you just go insane. You go complete, and with fake contact lenses in as well. And she completely wigged, just tore the makeup off. Went completely insane. That was as much shooting as you could do with her that night.
I started talking in this really sing-song, baby girl voice, and then I started singing, and then I started laughing. And when I started laughing, there were crew people in the cabin, and they just stopped, and they said, "Stop it, stop her, stop that." And Sam and I just looked at each other and said, "That's where we'll go. That's what we'll do. We'll just make her this baby doll figure that you just want to throw against the wall."
Probably my favorite bit of dialogue in the whole film is the, what are we gonna do? We're gonna bury her. Hey, you can't bury Shelley. She's a friend of ours. It's that kind of that thing of it being like a sort of watching like an X-rated episode of Scooby-Doo. Sort of like.
I mean, here's the thing about horror fans. They love to complain. They never support original movies. They bitch about sequels, and they'll rush out and see them opening weekend. So, of course, more sequels get made. And then an original movie gets made, and they go on the internet, and they tear the director down because they're jealous. Or whatever. They're like, this person sucks. This movie's going to be terrible. It's like the horror fans are great, but a lot of the times they don't want to give new people a chance. They say they want new horror, and then they go, well, it wasn't as good as Evil Dead. It's like, well, yeah, it's Evil Dead. Nothing's ever going to be as good as Evil Dead. That's why it's Evil Dead.
Well, the interesting thing that a lot of people don't know about Evil Dead 2 is that in the original script, we were going to Sam wanted to use footage from the first movie and just incorporate that into the film so that everyone that hadn't seen the first movie, you'd get like a quick recap and then boom, pick it up where we moved on from. And they couldn't get the rights. New Line wouldn't give them the rights because it was a different company producing this film. So we actually had prepped an entire new beginning where we got all the people together and we reshot part of Evil Dead 1 with new actors so that they could use it in Evil Dead 2 as a bridge between the two films.
We've been approached numerous times by all different people to remake Evil Dead, and we always turned it down, and then New Line came to us and said, we want to do Ash versus Freddy versus Jason. And we thought about it for 1 second because it was really an opportunity for Bruce Campbell to go out and get a big paycheck and get himself in 3,000 prints, and but we also knew that we would totally trash the franchise in doing that there would be no Evil Dead 4 kind of reuniting Sam and Bruce and myself working together to make whatever that is, nor would there be a really good reason to go back and remake the original Evil Dead, to kind of relaunch the franchise itself with a kind of a new cast, even though they'd all have different names, and a new hot filmmaker who wants to honor the first one and provide kind of the ultimate experience in grueling terror for a whole new audience. So that was kind of how the thinking has been. We kind of put it out in the trades that we were thinking about doing it to see who came forward that said they wanted to redo it. When James Cameron, Steven Spielberg, and Quentin Tarantino turned us down, we went, now who do we go to?